On the ABC News website, Bangladesh goes to the polls today in turbulent circumstances. This is the latest in a series of articles about the violence and threatening environment for what will likely be a one-sided election. Now let's take a closer look at that and other stories making headlines this morning with former diplomat and business executive Ian Kemish. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. Now, we heard there what is likely a one-sided election. Surely we can call it that?
I think we can certainly call it that. Here's hoping that the election today, as it takes place in Bangladesh, a country of 170 million people in our region, is more peaceful and more orderly than the last several days. It's been really very difficult. We've had this series of arson attacks, including the attack on a train over the course of the last 24 hours, but an attack against polling places. 7 opposition activists have been arrested in the course of that, which of course supports in some ways the sense that the government itself may be weaponising the judicial system against its opponents. Who knows exactly what's happened here, but there has been a steady series of arguments and articles depicting the existing government of Sheikh Hasina as being authoritarian and seeking to use its position to square away this election before it actually takes place. Bangladesh has been dominated by 2 women, Sheikh Hasina and Khaled Zia, for many years. Elections have been difficult each time. And as you say, it's looking pretty one-sided. After all, the Khaled Zia, the principal opposition leader, is currently under house arrest.
Yeah, and I mean, he's familiar with this pattern. So as you speak there about these 7 opposition party members being arrested over an arson attack, it's not as if these arrests haven't happened before at earlier elections. Is the government there trying to create an impression of democracy at all in this? And if they are, is it for the domestic audience or for the international audience?
Oh, look, I think it's for both. I think that to be fair about it, Sheikh Hasina's Awami League has some very significant political support in the country. The government has managed to do better economically than many might have expected, and it's positioned itself quite well between China and India. So there are many, I think, who do actually support the government. But you know, the circumstances of these, the opposition sought to convince the government to put a caretaker, neutral administration in place to conduct this election. They refused, and against the background of very difficult elections in the past, that just was beyond the line as far as the opposition was concerned, and they've decided they're not even going to participate. So, you know, this election is clearly going to result in the re-election of the government.
Ian, let's move on from one democratic discussion to another and talk US politics. We know that Joe Biden has long called Donald Trump a threat to democracy, but now Donald Trump seems to be batting that allegation back. I mean, these are big accusations. Do we need to be worried about a peaceful transfer of power issue?
Look, here we are, the 3rd anniversary. It still is today, the 6th of January over in the United States, the 3rd anniversary of the storming of the Capitol. You have the 2 major presidential contenders in the United States positioning for that election that's also taking place this year in November. And as you say, each are depicting the other as a fundamental threat to the nation's foundations, to its democratic foundations. For those of us in Australia, it might be a bit more intuitive to understand the argument about Donald Trump, perhaps. You know, there is that background, that refusal to accept the election result, even now, from last time round. In Trump's case, he's accusing Biden of being a threat because, you know, he depicts that, for example, the legal cases against himself as a weaponisation, again, of the country's legal system for political purposes. So the arguments mount. It's, you know, a very unedifying picture. And, you know, as we reflect on this year of elections, because, you know, half the world's population is going to have the opportunity to vote this year, we can hope that in some of the other cases, at least, there won't be these very significant questions over the health of democracy. certainly
Yeah.
applies in the United States, unfortunately.
Yeah, there are a lot of elections this year, as you say. The US, though, of course, we know voting not compulsory, so that tends to appeal to the extremes. And as we're seeing these images played out again on the anniversary of January 6, a poll is showing that 3 in 10 Republicans believe that the FBI, in fact, instigated that Capitol attack. So really the theories that surround that, again, appeal to those extremes.
It really is hard to understand, isn't it, if you're not in it? And it really says something, I think, about the power of social media in manipulating people's thinking. That so many people think like that seems incredible to those of us in Australia. But I think, you can only really understand it if you're there and if you're in it. There are many, many good-minded Americans who find that the circumstances quite extraordinary. But there are, as you say, these extremes who feel very strongly that, democracy has been undermined by the deep state.
And Ian, finally, let's talk about Russia, because Vladimir Putin has come out revealing a new enemy is the headline, kind of trying to spin a new story to his people about the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, the narrative is being reshaped yet again, and here we are again, another election, and undoubtedly not a free and fair election to take place for the presidency of Russia in March this year. In this case, it's almost like George Orwell, that sort of old slogan of the totalitarian regime, war is peace. This sense that Putin is building a sort of sense of permanent narrative that Russia's sovereignty will always need to be defended against this great enemy, the West. It's no longer about Ukraine in the language he's using. It's the West more generally that is being depicted as the foe. And there's some good analysis in the article you're talking about by a range of think tanks about the underlying motivation and philosophy behind this from Putin's perspective. It really does seem to be all about building a sense that Russia must always be in conflict, must always be at war to defend its sovereignty and to defend its values. And of course, the enemy can't just be Ukraine. The enemy needs to be the rest of the world. It seems to me, anyway, to be really paranoid way of thinking about the world. But the argument in this article is that it serves a fundamental political purpose from Putin's perspective.
Yeah, Ian, you would know this all too well. Dictators, they're extremely strong, but also extremely fragile, depending on the way you look at it. This argument for the domestic audience, are they going to buy it, and does it matter anyway?
Look, I am no huge Russia expert, but what I have observed over time is that Russian nationalism can be manipulated in this way, and that to a surprising extent, people will buy into this narrative. It plays to their sense of history, their sense dating back particularly to the Second World War, where they needed to, they're very proud of and really did have to defend themselves against a principal enemy. Putin recalls that moment in history. It's perverse, of course, because the current situation is nothing like that. In these circumstances, it was Russia, after all. It was the aggressor that invaded another country. And yet these historical storylines can be manipulated, it seems, to convince Russians to stay the course with their leader, because in the end, unity at home is fundamental, so the argument goes, if you're going to defend the Russian state.
And we'll have to leave it there. Former diplomat and business executive Ian Kemish, thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Breakfast this morning.
Thank you.